Ape Pio Russia, Rome, Ape Pio Russia, Rome, Ape Pio Russia, Rome, Ape Pio Russia, Rome.
So, this is where Kulakamagama. This is Sivilo da Kama. Pio Nanga, Russia Nanga, Yena Lulu, Yamananga, Yena Patala, Siana Jimbaga, Yena Yeti Vide. Pio Nanga, Russia Nanga, Dinia Savi, Twitter, and Maja Tevi, Twitter Motiva. Hello, by Twitter Lesro, Siana, Abe Pio Russia, Lomishi, Twitter at Tatua, I did Tatura by it. The Twitter of Manaka Savi, did it, Yasa, Twitter of Kivido, Manakale, Savido, Twitter of Motiva. Humanitarian, Samudia, Pisono of Tibido, Twitter of Tiba. Twitter and Twitter Kama, Niro Ain, Veranaria, almost of it, Veranaria Trabido. I made a Twitter of Lila or Matiba. It is Twitter and Idemaro, it is 2,000 Katura. Palazo, Miena, Siana, Shimpama, Miena Yati Vide, Tayo Nang and Rashana and go, but Lumishi, Twitter and Mateo Matiba. Yaja Lucy, Kay, but also Colania Lavido, hello, the service, and all TV. They are your Chabida, Allo, you do it, Namodi, or Hotel. But I might all. Don't အော်လေးရ
ဘိုးဒီဝင်ဦးမှာ
ဟောအေးအခုဆိုရင်ဒီနေ့ညတော့ကလည်းအကုန်လုံးကိုတရက်ကွက်လုံးအနီးစပ်တဲ့ရက်ကွက်အားလုံးကိုသိပေးပြီးပါပြီဒဇိန်းတွေကျွန်တော်လိုပေါ့ရှေ့ရလာပြီးတော့ညအချိန်မတော်လာဆွဲရင်လမ်းလူလမ်းသားတွေရောရက်ကွက်သူရက်ကွက်သားတွေအားလုံးတန်ဘုံတီးစနစ်နဲ့အခုနောက်တစ်ခုကဒီနေ့တရုတ်နဲ့ရုရှားပြည်သမမှာကန်လန်လုံးနေတဲ့နိုင်ငံကိုဘလို့မရှိကြောင်းလည်းကြွေးကြော်မှာဖြစ်ပါတယ်ဒီလိုတင်ပေးရဆိုတာနောက်ရက်ွက်ဒီ
အဲ့တော့ဒီမကြောင်ဘူးလားအဲ့တော့တခြားနယ်ဘက်ကဖြစ်နေတယ်ကိုကျွန်တော်ကပြောတာသူ့ကိုဖုန်းတော့ဖွင့်ပြီး
ပြီးတော့မှ
ဖွင့်ပြီး
โอเคကျွန်တော်တို့ကကိုယ်ရဲ့လက်လန်းမိတဲ့နေရာတွေအားလုံးကိုကျွန်တော်တို့ပြည်သူတွေအားလုံးတက်လှမ်းပြီးတော့သတိပေးထားပါတယ်ရက်ွက်ထဲမှာအစိမ်းတွေမတော်စလာရောက်ဆွဲဘသူ့ပဲလားဆွဲအဲ့အိမ်ရနဲ့អော်လိုက်တာလေကျွန်တော်တို့အားလုံးကတန်ချောင်းခောက်ပြီးအကုန်လုံးအဲ့နေရာကိုစုရက်ဟိုလာဖြစ်ပါတယ်နောက်អော်ရမှာဖြစ်ပါတယ်အဲ့လိုစနစ်တွေကိုကျွန်တော်အလံပေးထားစနစ်တွေကိုကျွန်တော်တို့ကစနစ်တကျကျွန်တော်တို့ပြောလဲပြောထားယူပါပြီအကုန်လုံးတက်လန့်လာပါတယ်ဒါတော့လမ်းရလူတွေအားလုံးကအိမ်ထဲကနေဗဒနာထွက်ပြီးတော့စုံနေကြဖြစ်ပါတယ်
ကျွန်တော်တို့နော်ဇိုးတစ်ခုဖိတ်ခဲ့လေရှင်ရဲ့တန်ကြောင်းတာခောက်တာတန်ကြောင်းခောက်တာအိမ်မီးလေးပုံဖွင့်ထားပေးပါအင်းရှင်မီးလေးပုံဖွင့်ထားပေးမှာဗရဏမီးလေးဖွင့်ထားပေးအင်းရှင်မီးလေးဖွင့်ထားပေးဗရဏမီးလေးဖွင့်ထားပေးအောက်တစ်ခါတော့ခက်တာပြီးတော့ဗရဏမီးလေးကိုဖွင့်ထားပါအရင်အနေရရှိနေလို့ပါဟုတ်တယ်တန်ကြစီရိုက်ကိုခေါ်ရမှာအဲ့ဒါမို့အိမ်မီးလေးအင်းရှင်မီးလေးကိုဖွင့်ထားပေးပါလို့
ဒီအကြောင်းရတယ်
အေးပေါ်ဖြစ်နေလို့ပါကျွန်တော်တို့လည်းကျွန်တော်တို့အင်းရှင်မှာကျွန်တော်တို့ကင်းဆောက်ပြီးကျွန်တော်တို့ကအိမ်နေမှာပါခိုင်ဆောင်နေပါပါတနေ့ကျွန်တော်တို့ခိုင်ဆောင်ပေးမှာပါမီးလေးတွေအင်းရှင်မီးတွေလမ်းမီးတွေတခါမီးတွေအကုန်လုံးဖွင့်ပေးတာပါအန်ရကင်းအောင်လို့ဒီလိုကျောင်းတော်ကပြီးရလို့ရှိလို့ရှိတန်ကြောင်ချင်းတဲ့တန်ကြောင်ခေါင်းကြလိုက်ဗျာအကုန်လုံးထွက်လာမယ်ကျွန်တော်ထွက်လာမယ်တောင်းလာတဲ့ညီရလာဟဲ့ညီရဟဲ့ညီရဟဲ့တောင်းလာတဲ့ညီရလာဟဲ့ညီရဟဲ့ညီရဟဲ့တောင်းလာတဲ့ညီရလာဟဲ့ညီရဟဲ့ညီရဟဲ့မဆူကျမ်းပါပါမဆူကျမ်းပါပါမဆူကျမ်းပါပါမဆူနဲ့တမနာကြီးချက်ချင်းတော့မဆူနဲ့တမနာကြီးကျွန်တော်တို့ကအလုံးမရှိအလုံးမရှိအမေရှိအာနာရှင်အားပေးတဲ့တရုတ်နဲ့ရှားကိုလုံးမရှိရှိအာနာရှင်အားပေးတဲ့တရုတ်နဲ့ရှားကိုလုံးမရှိရှိအာနာရှင်အားပေးတဲ့တရုတ်နဲ့ရှားကိုလုံးမရှိတောင်းလာတဲ့ညီရလာတဲ့ညီရတောင်းလာတဲ့ညီရလာတဲ့ညီရမီလေးခုံးမိတာနော်ခေကာမီလေးခုံးတာအကြောင်းစုံကရှိုးရင်တန်းတာရောက်ပါမယ်ရားရည်တွေလည်းရားလေးပဲနော်သူတို့ပြင်ပါလေအဲ့ဒါမို့ဘာပဲလေလမ်းမီလေးတခါမီလေးလမ်းမီလေးကိုခုံးမိတာပါဓာတ်တွေကိုတော့ဒီချခက်သားပါကျွန်တော်တို့လည်းကင်းဆောင်ပြီမှာအကြောင်းတွေတော့ရှိလို့ရှိတန်းချောင်းလို့ရင်ကျွန်တော်ရှိမှလာပြောရပါတယ်တန်းချောင်းရှိတယ်ကဲကျွန်တော်တော့ခရိုင်ကိုခရိုင်ကျွန်တော်အခုချိန်မှာတော့ရေးကြီးတယ်လောကဟိုကမြစ်ဖြတ်နိုင်မဲ့စီးရီးယားအကြောင်းကျွန်တော်ရားလူတွေလိုက်အောင်လုပ်ရတယ်စီးရီးယားကြောင်းတော့ဝင်လာလားအားလုံးစီးစရဲမြစ်ဖြတ်ဖို့စီးရီးယားမှာဝင်အောင်ဝင်ရတယ်နော်စီးရီးယားမှာဝင်လို့လိုက်အောင်ဝင်ရတယ်အားလုံးစီးစရဲမြစ်ဖြတ်ဖို့စီးရီးယားအားလုံးစီးစရဲမြစ်ဖြတ်ဖို့စီးရီးယား
ဒီပါအစ်တွေပါကဲအားလုံးကျေးဇူးတင်ပါတယ်နော်
လိုက်ဒီနားမှာအားမရှိတော့ဘူးကြည့်ရဲလူအားလို့ကျေးဇူးပါနည်း share လေးပေးပါအားနေပဲရှိတော့တယ်
ရှင်နီလန်းနေနဲ့လက်တလောကြုံတွေ့လာနိုင်တဲ့အခက်အခဲတွေကိုကျွန်မဒီနေရာမှာဆွေးနွေးသွားမှာဖြစ်ပါတယ်။လက်ရှိကျွန်မတို့ပြည်သူ့ဒီမိုကရေစီအရေးတော်ပုံကြီးကိုကြည့်လိုက်ရင်အထူးကလှုပ်ရှားမှုထောက်တိုင်3ခုရှိပါတယ်။နံပါတ်1ကတော့ပြည်သူ့ဝန်ထမ်းများရဲ့အစိုးရနဲ့မပူးပေါင်းရေးလှုပ်ရှားမှုပါ။ နံပါတ်1ကတော့ပြည်သူများရဲ့အကြမ်းမဖက်ဆန့်ကျင်စန္ဒပြမှုပါနံပါတ်3ကတော့နိုင်ငံရေးဓမ္မတွေရဲ့လွတ်တော်လှုပ်ရှားမှုဆိုတဲ့လှုပ်ရှားမှုကြီး3ရပ်ဖြစ်ပါတယ်ဆိုတော့ဒီစာစုမှာဆိုရင်ကျွန်မကဝန်ထမ်းတွေရဲ့အစိုးရနဲ့မပူးပေါင်းရေးလှုပ်ရှားမှုကိုအဓိကထားပြီးတင်ပြဆွေးနွေးပါမယ်ဆိုတော့ဝန်ထမ်းတွေရဲ့အစိုးရရဲ့မပူးပေါင်းရေးလှုပ်ရှားမှုကိုကြည့်လိုက်မယ်ဆိုရင်လက်ရှိအာဏာသိမ်းအစိုးရကတရားမဝင်ပါဘူးဒီတော့ဝန်ထမ်းတွေအနေနဲ့အာဏာသိမ်းအစိုးရကိုခစားပြီးအစိုးရရဲ့ရန်တရားထဲမှာခွေးသားစိတ်တွေအဖြစ်မလုပ်နိုင်ပါဘူးဒီတော့တရားမဝင်တဲ့အစိုးရနဲ့မပူးပေါင်းမှုဆိုတဲ့ရည်ရွယ်ချက်နဲ့လှုပ်ရှားမှုပါဒီလှုပ်ရှားမှုကအစိုးရရဲ့ရန်တရားတွေရက်တန့်သွားပြီးအစိုးရလုပ်ငန်းတွေမလဲပတ်နိုင်အောင်လှုပ်ရှားမှုပါရည်ရွယ်တဲ့လှုပ်ရှားမှုပါဆိုတော့ဒီလှုပ်ရှားမှု3ရက်လုံးမှာလည်းဒီအစိုးရနဲ့မပူးပေါင်းတဲ့ CDM လှုပ်ရှားမှုကဆိုရင်အစိုးရရဲ့ထောက်တိုင်ကိုအဖြူလဲနိုင်ဆုံးလှုပ်ရှားမှုဖြစ်ပါတယ်ဆိုတော့အစိုးရရန်တရားကိုလေ့လာကြည့်တဲ့အခါမှာအဓိကအပိုင်း2ပိုင်းရှိပါတယ်နံပါတ်1ကတော့ဝန်ဆောင်မှုပေးတဲ့အပိုင်းနဲ့နံပါတ်2ကတော့အုပ်ချုပ်ရေးရန်တရားအပိုင်းဖြစ်ပါတယ်ဆိုတော့ဥပမာအားဖြင့်ရက်စစ်မီပေးရေးပို့ဆောင်ရေးစတာတွေကဝန်ဆောင်မှုပေးတဲ့ရန်တရားတွေပါထွေအုပ်ရဲစတာတွေကတော့အုပ်ချုပ်ရေးရန်တရားတွေဖြစ်ပါတယ်ရှင်ဆိုတော့ဝန်ထမ်းတွေရဲ့အစိုးရနဲ့မပူးပေါင်းရေးလှုပ်ရှားမှုကတော့ဝန်ဆောင်မှုပေးတဲ့ရန်တရားရောအောက်ချုပ်ရေးရန်တရားကိုရောပါရက်တန့်တော့အောင်ရည်ရွယ်ပြီးမှလှုပ်ဆောင်ရပါလိမ့်မယ်ဆိုတော့ဒီနှစ်ခုလုံးရက်မှာတာအစိုးရရဲ့ရန်တရားရက်မှာပါဒီနေရာမှာအောက်ချုပ်ရေးရန်တရားတွေရက်သွားတဲ့အခါမှာပြည်သူလုံခြုံရေးထိခိုက်တာမျိုးတွေကြုံရနိုင်တယ်လို့ဝန်ဆောင်မှုရန်တရားတွေရက်သွားတဲ့အခါမှာလည်းပြည်သူတွေပုံမှန်ရနေတဲ့ဝန်ဆောင်မှုတွေဖြစ်တဲ့ဝန်ဆောင်မှုတွေမရနိုင်တော့တာကိုလည်းကြုံတွေ့ရနိုင်ပါလိမ့်မယ်ဥမာအဖြစ်ရဲထွေအုပ်စားတဲ့ရန်တရားရက်သွားတဲ့အခါမှာတောကြောင်တွေလက်ခမောင်းခတ်လာနိုင်တယ်လို့ပဲဝန်ဆောင်မှုတွေရက်သွားတဲ့အခါမှာမိပြတ်တာရေပြတ်တာမျိုးလည်းကြုံရနိုင်ပါတယ်အဲ့ဒါအပြင်ခဏလုံးကဖြစ်ခဲ့တဲ့ကြုံတွေ့မှုတွေအပြင်ကိုပဲအာနာသိန်းထားသူတွေကဝန်ထမ်းတွေစန္ဒပြလို့ဖြစ်ရတာပါဆိုပြီးတော့မှတမင်တကာရည်ရွယ်ပြီးတော့မှတောကြောင်တွေကိုတမင်တကာစူပူအောင်လုပ်ခိုင်းတာထောင်ခါတာအခုဆိုရင်ကျမတို့ကြားနေရပြီဒီကနေ့ဆိုရင်ကျမတို့ထောင်ခါတဲ့ထောင်ကနေလွတ်လိုက်တာရာဇဝတ်သားတွေလွတ်လိုက်တာမျိုးတွေကျမတို့ပြန်ကြားရတယ်ဆိုတော့ဒီရာဇဝတ်သားတွေကကျမတို့ရဲ့လူထုလှုပ်ရှားမှုတွေတဲ့ကိုဝင်ပြီးတော့မှစူပူမလုံဆော်ဘူးလို့လည်းဒါမပြောနိုင်ဘူးဆိုတော့ဒါတွေကိုလည်းကျမတို့ကသတိထားဖို့လိုပါတယ်နောက်တစ်ခုကတော့လူတွေနဲ့ရက်ရွာတွေကိုမလုံမချုပ်ဖြစ်အောင်လုပ်တာတွေကိုပါအစိုးရကအာဏာသိမ်းအစိုးရကဖန်တီးလာနိုင်ပါတယ်ဒါအပြင်တမင်တကာရေဖြက်ပစ်တာမီးဖြက်ပစ်တာတွေလုပ်ပြီးတော့မှဆန္ဒပြတဲ့ပြည်သူဝန်ထမ်းတွေကိုပြည်သူတွေမုန်းလာအောင်လဲလက်ရှိအာဏာသိမ်းအစိုးရကလှုပ်လာနိုင်ပါတယ်ဒါတွေကအာဏာရှင်တွေလှုပ်ထားရှိတဲ့ကိစ္စတွေပါဆိုတော့ဒါတွေကိုကျမတို့ကကြိုးပြီးစဉ်းစားထားဖို့လိုပါတယ်ဆိုတော့လက်ရှိပြည်သူဒီမိုကရေစီအရေးတော်ဘုံကြီးရဲ့အစိုးရနဲ့ဝန်ထမ်းတွေအစိုးရနဲ့မပူးပေါင်းရေးလှုပ်ရှားမှုကိုကြည့်မယ်ဆိုရင်အတိုင်းအတာတစ်ခုအခုချိန်ထိအတိုင်းအတာတစ်ခုဒီအောင်မြင်နေတာကိုတွေ့ရပါတယ်ဆိုတော့ခံမှန်းမှုရဆိုရင်လက်ရှိအချိန်တွေထိဝန်ထမ်း55%ကအစိုးရနဲ့မပူးပေါင်းရေးလှုပ်ရှားမှုတွေထဲမှာပါနေပါတယ်ထပ်ပြီးတဲ့ပါလာဖို့တွေရှိပါတယ်အုပ်ချုပ်ရေးပိုင်းဆိုင်ရာဝန်ထမ်းတွေဖြစ်တဲ့ရဲထွေအုပ်တို့လည်းပါလာတာကိုတွေ့ရပါတယ်နံပါတ်2ချက်နေနဲ့ကတော့ကျမတို့ဒီလိုလှုပ်ရှားမှုတွေကိုပြန်ပြီးကြည့်လိုက်တဲ့အခါကျလို့ရှိရင်လှုပ်ရှားမှုတိုင်းကတော့ 100% အပြည့်ပါလာဖို့ဆိုတာမလွယ်ကူပါဘူးဒါကဘယ်နိုင်ငံမှာမှ 100% အပြည့်ပါလာတယ်ဆိုတာကိုမဖြစ်နိုင်ပါဘူးမရှိပါဘူးဒါပေမဲ့85%ကျော်ပါလာရင်အထူးသဖြင့်အောက်ချုပ်ရေးရန်တရားကလူတွေအများဆုံးပါလာနိုင်ရင်တော့အစိုးရရဲ့ရန်တရားတစ်ခုလုံးကိုကျမတို့ရက်ပစ်လို့ရပါတယ်ဒါကြောင့်မို့လို့ပဲကျမတို့ကာချုပ်ကလက်ရှိအာဏာသိမ်းတဲ့ကာချုပ်ကသူပြောနေခဲ့တဲ့မိန့်ခွန်းတွေမှာပြန်ပြီးနားထောင်ကြည့်လို့ရှိရင်ဝန်ထမ်းတွေရုံးတက်ကြပါဆိုတဲ့ဟာကိုခဏအလေးထားပြီးပြောလာတယ်ဝန်ထမ်းတွေရုံးမတက်လို့ရှိရင်ဘယ်လိုအရေးယူလို့ရလဲဆိုတဲ့
of the 29th special session of the Human Rights Council. We shall now turn to our list of speakers for non-government organizations. And I give the floor to the International Federation for Human Rights Leagues. The floor is yours.
Madam President, FIDH and its member organizations ALTSEAN Burma and Women Peace Network express strongest condemnation of the Myanmar military coup. The Tatmadaw violated its own undemocratic 2008 constitution, a charter it pledged to respect just 2 days before the coup d'etat. At least 220 people, including elected members of parliament, government officials and activists, have been arbitrarily detained since the coup. The number rises by the hour. Censorship controls have been tightened. Internet connectivity was cut to 14%. A new repressive cybersecurity law has been proposed. Security forces have cracked down violently on peaceful and unarmed protesters in violation of international standards for the policing of assemblies. A safe, dignified, and voluntary repatriation of Rohingya refugees will not be possible under the rule of the Tatmadaw, the very institution responsible for a genocidal campaign against them and for the commission of serious international crimes against other ethnic nationalities. We urgently call on the Council to mandate the UN Special Rapporteur to provide an oral update on the situation at the next Council sessions and to transmit all evidence of international crimes and violations of international law committed since the coup in pursuit of accountability. Thank you.
Thank you. And I give the floor to Article 19, the International Centre Against Censorship. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam President. Since the Myanmar military illegally seized power on February 1st, the situation for freedom of expression and the right to information has deteriorated steeply. We urge the Council to speak out against the arbitrary detention of activists and journalists and to call on the military to refrain from any further arrests. The military has blocked access to Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and a number of virtual private networks. On February 6th and 7th, the military implemented a nationwide internet shutdown. We are deeply concerned that future internet cuts will hamper accountability efforts and allow the military to commit further human rights violations. We are deeply concerned by the draft cybersecurity law that the Myanmar military seeks to enact without legal authority. The law would enable vast online surveillance powers by military authorities and impose liabilities on telecommunications operators who fail to take action against a broad range of legitimate forms of expression deemed illegal under the law. We call on the Special Rapporteur on Myanmar and the High Commissioner to examine and report on these issues with a view to ensuring full accountability. We also urge the Council to take action if there is a further deterioration in the human rights situation or if there is a denial of access or lack of meaningful cooperation with the Special Rapporteur. Thank you.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to Alliance Defending Freedom.
ADF International is appalled by the continually worsening human rights situation in Myanmar, not least as a result of the February 1st military takeover, and called for an immediate return to civilian rule. We are dismayed that Myanmar is back in the hands of the same military that, since August 2017, has been carrying out a brutal and sustained campaign of genocide against the Rohingya Muslim minority in Rakhine State. The pervasive and long-standing persecution directed against Myanmar's ethnic and religious minorities is an outrage to the conscience of humanity, and their plight will only continue to worsen without timely and resolute responses to the Tatmadaw's reckless disregard for human rights. With this in mind, we welcome the convening of a special session of the Human Rights Council to address the implications of the current crisis. Yet, this is not enough. We urge you to call on the Security Council to come together and take swift action in support of democracy and human rights in Myanmar, including by imposing targeted sanctions against both the military leaders and their disgraceful enablers, as well as by bringing to justice the perpetrators of the gross violations of human rights that have occurred in the country. We also urge all states to stand in solidarity with Myanmar's persecuted ethnic and religious minorities by formally recognizing the Rohingya crisis as a genocide in line with international law. Thank you.
Thank you. And I give the floor to the International Commission of Jurists. The floor is yours.
Madam President, the ICJ condemns the Myanmar military's unlawful seizure of authority and the unconstitutional declaration of a state of emergency on 1st of February. These actions defy core rule of law principles and provide an illegitimate basis for the suspension and erosion of human rights. Nearly 200 people, including human rights defenders, have been arbitrarily detained, some in unknown locations. Security forces have used excessive force against peaceful protesters, causing serious injuries. Regulations imposed pursuant to the state of emergency grant military forces nearly complete impunity. Furthermore, these regulations suspend crucial judicial remedies for violation of rights, such as the writ of habeas corpus. Judges, including from the Supreme Court, have been illegally removed and replaced, undermining the independence of an already embattled judiciary. The military takeover further endangers the already grave situation of the Rohingya community. The ICJ calls on the Council to urge the military to immediately return authority to the civilian government and allow immediate access to the Special Rapporteur on Myanmar and other special procedures, the OECHR and the Independent Investigative Mechanism for Myanmar, whose mandate includes investigating all serious human rights violations. Member States should take necessary measures to ensure truth, justice and accountability for crimes under international law, including by supporting all relevant accountability mechanisms. I thank you.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to Amnesty International.
Madam President, hundreds of thousands of people have taken to the streets to peacefully protest. The security forces have responded with rubber bullets, tear gas, water cannons, and in at least one case, live rounds of ammunition. Over 220 people have been arbitrarily detained and many more are in hiding. Shutting down and slowing the internet is a dangerous move in the context of a volatile coup and a pandemic and a violation of rights of people across the country. The proposed cybersecurity law would grant sweeping censorship and surveillance powers to the military and have dire consequences for civil society engagement with the international community. We are alarmed by the potential for further violence and serious violations. Not long ago, the fact-finding mission presented compelling evidence to this Council that the military had committed grave crimes under international law, including crimes against humanity, war crimes, and possibly genocide. We're gravely concerned for ethnic and religious minorities who have historically been targeted by the military, including the Rohingya, who continue to be denied their rights to citizenship and freedom of movement in Rakhine State, and those who wish to return home, and Rakhine, Chin, Shan, Karen, Kachin, and other minorities living in conflict-affected areas. Sustained and unfettered humanitarian access to at-risk populations is now urgent. Madam President, this is a dangerous and volatile situation, and the international community, including this Council and the Security Council, must do all it can to protect the people of Myanmar from harm, to halt and prevent further violations of their rights, and to ensure accountability for crimes under international law. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to Human Rights Watch. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam President. Myanmar once again stands at a precipice. Hundreds of people, including elected political leaders and human rights defenders, have been arbitrarily detained. President Win Myint, Aung San Suu Kyi, and many other legislators continue to be held incommunicado. Journalists face threats and intimidation. The military continues to cut the internet and other forms of communication. Anti-coup protests have drawn hundreds of thousands of people to the streets, calling for a return to democratic rule. They have been met with tear gas, water cannons, rubber bullets, and live ammunition. The situation could still get much worse. Myanmar security forces have a history of quelling peaceful dissent through brute force. The military has often exploited political instability to launch abusive operations in Rakhine, Shan, Karen, Kachin, and other states. The UN Security Council spoke with one voice, calling for respect for human rights and the rule of law. This council should also stand united in condemning the coup and calling for release of all detainees and reinstatement of the democratically elected government. The resolution should advance accountability, strengthen the rapid response capacity of the Special Rapporteur, and request the High Commissioner to fully exercise her prevention mandate. States should apply targeted sanctions on military leaders responsible for the coup and on military-owned companies. The Council needs to stand ready to take whatever further measures are necessary to address this crisis as it unfolds. Thank you.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to Civicus. The floor is yours.
Civicus thanks the UK and EU for your leadership in calling for this special session. The situation in Myanmar for our partners and members is grave, critical, and moving fast. The risk of increasingly severe violations to fundamental freedoms and a rapidly deteriorating human rights situation cannot be overstated. We welcome that the Council, led by the UK and EU, is willing and able to respond with speed. The people of Myanmar have spoken and continue to speak out at grave personal risk. The High Commissioner for Human Rights has already raised deep fears of the violent crackdown on dissenting voices. We see the beginning of this crackdown already. Activists have been detained, peaceful protesters suppressed with excessive force. Journalists have been threatened. Internet was briefly shut down, plunging the country into a communication blackout, and there are plans to introduce new restrictive cyber laws. The warning signs are ominous. Myanmar risks returning to the days of mass incarceration of human rights defenders, violent crackdowns on mass protests, and isolation both inside and outside. Steps taken towards democracy, however tentative and fragile and imperfect, must be protected and a return to military dictatorship prevented. The most valuable role for the Human Rights Council at this critical point will be to put into place measures of enhanced monitoring and reporting which protects those on the ground subject to human rights violations, contributes to further action if necessary, and forwards accountability for such violations. It is essential that a strong resolution is adopted by the Council to achieve this. The opportunity for the Council to take strong action to this end is right in front of it. We thank you.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to the Asian Forum for Human Rights and Development. The floor is yours.
Madam President, Forum Asia welcomes this special session. This is an important step in addressing the rapidly escalating human rights crisis in Myanmar following the military coup. Council's response to the crisis should reflect its gravity. Myanmar military's history of violent crackdowns on peaceful protests, as well as ongoing violations including arbitrary detention of elected officials, human rights defenders and activists, use of excessive force and lethal weapons against peaceful protesters, internet shutdowns, and restrictions on communication and media point to further escalations. Council should put in place necessary mechanisms for rapid and emergency response to prevent further violations in line with its prevention mandate. Failure to respond appropriately by the Council, the UN and the international community has too often led to recurrence of grave international crimes in Myanmar. At the root of the ongoing crisis is the entrenched impunity of the Myanmar military for its continuing grave violations of international human rights and humanitarian law, including genocide against Rohingya. The Council and the international community must take all necessary steps to hold Myanmar military accountable for its crimes. We call on Myanmar military to immediately restore the legitimate civilian government, refrain from using violence against peaceful protesters, respect the rights to freedom of expression, assembly and association, unconditionally release all those who are arbitrarily detained, permanently restore access to internet, mobile networks, media and social media, and all human rights and humanitarian law violations in ethnic ceasefire areas, and allow unimpeded humanitarian access. Thank you.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to Caritas International.
Madam President, echoing the voice of our local humanitarian partners and of the local Catholic Church, Caritas expresses grave concern about the impact of the escalating violence on the already fragile humanitarian situation and on the ability of aid organizations to reach people in need. End of January, the United Nations and its humanitarian partners launched the Humanitarian Response Plan for Myanmar to support close to 1 million people in need and to respond to the current COVID pandemic. Yet, since the outbreak of the crisis, access to vulnerable communities has been further restricted, putting extreme strain on humanitarian organizations' capacity to deliver life-saving assistance and to ensure the protection of people, particularly those in conflict-affected areas and IDP communities in Kachin, Northern Shan, Chin, Rakhine, and Kain states. In light of these circumstances, we call on all concerned stakeholders to secure unhindered and safe humanitarian access to deliver life-saving assistance and resume the response to the pandemic, to refrain from using violence and restore the rule of law and principles of democracy. We also call on the Human Rights Council and the international community to closely monitor the human rights and humanitarian situation in Myanmar through appropriate human rights mechanisms and to stand in solidarity with the people of Myanmar and support any effort for a peaceful resolution of the current crisis through dialogue and reconciliation in accordance with the will of the people of Myanmar.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to Christian Solidarity Worldwide. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam President. CSW welcomes this special session on the human rights implications of the crisis in Myanmar. We unequivocally condemn the military coup which overthrew Aung San Suu Kyi's democratically elected civilian-led government on the 1st of February. We call for the immediate release of Aung San Suu Kyi and other political leaders. We also call for the immediate release of all those detained for peacefully exercising their rights during anti-coup protests. We are concerned that such protests have been met with increasingly violent force. We urge the international community to do more to support protesters' calls for restoration of democracy, the release of political prisoners, and the establishment of a path to dialogue and reconciliation. CSW further urges the international community to respond to the urgent appeal from the Joint Strategy Team, a group of local humanitarian NGOs working in Kachin and Shan states, who have called for the safe and unimpeded humanitarian access for those assisting communities affected by armed conflicts in Kachin and Northern Shan states, as well as supporting the COVID-19 response. The military must remove blocks to humanitarian access in ethnic states, and the international community should provide immediate cross-border humanitarian aid to access those who cannot be reached from within the country. We call for the complete lifting of restrictions on telephone and internet communications and an end to the military's presence on the streets. Finally, we urge UN member states to enforce targeted, robust sanctions against the military and their enterprises and a global arms embargo. The time for strong statements alone has passed. The time for action is now. Thank you.
Thank you. And I give the floor to Mart for Peace, Development and Human Rights Association. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mrs. President. MAD Foundation for Peace, Development and Human Rights expresses its grave concern about the grave violations against human rights in Myanmar, where the military practices violations to democracy, freedom of expression and access to information. And what is happening in Myanmar will disrupt the democratic process. Therefore, MAD condemns the violence that takes place in Myanmar against the peaceful protesters who have taken to the streets across Myanmar to protest against a coup by the armed forces. The police have responded with water cannon, rubber pellets, and live ammunition. Also, MAD calls for establishing independent investigations and calls Myanmar to allow entry for a special rapporteur, and we call Myanmar to commit to cooperation with United Nations bodies. Thank you.
Thank you. With this last statement, we have exhausted the list of speakers. I wish to thank you for your statements and for your contributions to this discussion. We will now move to action on the draft resolution before us today. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, before moving to take action on the draft resolution A/HRC/S21/L1, entitled Human Rights Implications of the Crisis in Myanmar, I would like to remind you that the voting process is a members-only process. Observer states may only intervene in two instances: at the stage of introduction of a draft proposal, or in case they are the country concerned. Apart from these two cases, observer states will not be in a position to take the floor until the voting process is completed, not even on a point of order. We will follow the same standard procedure for voting as in previous sessions. I would like to also remind you that the general speaking time limits during the voting process will be 3 minutes. As decided by the Council this morning, should there be a request for a vote, we will apply the modalities described in Annex 2 of the minutes of the Bureau meeting of the 10th of February. We will proceed with a virtual roll call vote via Zoom, replicating as closely as possible a roll call vote organized in person and ensuring utmost care regarding security and transparency. If a delegation does not desire to take part in the vote, it may wish to indicate this to the Secretariat. I will therefore suspend this meeting for a few minutes to allow the Secretariat to prepare for the voting process in a virtual manner and to verify that all 47 states members of the Council are present on Zoom and are duly represented and in a position to take part in the voting process. I will request all observers, with the exception of the concerned country, to exit this Zoom meeting. The meeting is suspended. No? 29th special session of the Human Rights Council. We will now proceed with action on the draft resolution L1 entitled Human Rights Implications of the Crisis in Myanmar. I give the floor to the representatives of the United Kingdom and Portugal on behalf of the European Union to jointly introduce the draft resolution. Your Excellencies, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam President. Can you hear me?
Yes, please proceed, Ambassador. We can hear you.
Thank you, Madam President. The United Kingdom has the honour to present draft resolution S29L1 on the human rights implications of the crisis in Myanmar with the European Union to the Council. The draft resolution has a number of oral revisions which have been made public to all delegations via e-delegates. We are grateful for the support of Council members, the President and the Secretariat in convening this special session, and to all those who have spoken during the debate. Alongside the European Union, with the help of other Council members and observers, we have produced a resolution that draws attention to the deteriorating human rights situation in Myanmar following the imposition of a state of emergency by the military. Democratically elected leaders and members of civil society have been arbitrarily detained. The military have restricted access to communications, and there's been violence against protesters exercising their democratic rights. We are clear in this resolution that this state of emergency must be lifted immediately, that all those detained arbitrarily must be immediately released, and all efforts towards dialogue and reconciliation must be pursued. The UN Special Envoy for Myanmar and other UN mandate holders must be granted full, unrestricted and unmonitored access to Myanmar. This resolution also requests the Council's Special Rapporteur and the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights to assess the situation of human rights in Myanmar. The Special Rapporteur and the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights must be given full access to Myanmar and be granted an urgent visit to inform updates at future sessions of the Council. We remain fully supportive of the role of all United Nations mandate holders. United Kingdom remains deeply concerned about the deterioration of the human rights situation in Myanmar in recent days. This concern is shared by many members of this Council and other United Nations member states who are not a member of this Council, as we've heard very clearly today. We stand with the people of Myanmar who are exercising their democratic and human rights as we uphold our clear duty to promote universal respect for the protection of all human rights. Their wishes must be respected and the coup must be reversed. I will now turn to my colleague from Portugal representing the European Union presidency. Thank you.
I'm afraid for internal reasons, it is not Portugal, but Austria speaking on behalf of the European Union.
Thank you, Ambassador. You have the floor. This is Austria speaking on behalf of the European Union. You have the floor.
Yes, thank you, Madam President. I have the honor to present on behalf of the European Union and jointly with the United Kingdom the resolution on the human rights implications of the crisis in Myanmar. The EU and the United Kingdom made a joint request for this special session, which was supported by 50 states from all regions. The Human Rights Council's mandate includes prevention of human rights violations. Given the deeply concerning human rights situation in Myanmar that could deteriorate even further, it was important to convene the Council for this special session. With this resolution, we would like to send a strong signal to the people of Myanmar. The protection of their human rights matter to us. The High Commissioner for Human Rights and the Special Rapporteur on the human rights situation in Myanmar have expressed grave concern on the situation in Myanmar following the removal of the civilian government and the arbitrary detention of political leaders, human rights defenders, journalists, activists, and others by the military, and echoed the Secretary General's call for the military to respect the outcome of the elections. The message to the Myanmar military is also clear. The military is bound by international human rights law, including the right to peaceful assembly and freedom of expression, and it is to exercise utmost restraint and to refrain from any use of violence against peaceful protesters in respect of the rights of the people of Myanmar to protest peacefully. The EU is following the developments closely, including the continuing impunity. Accountability for past and ongoing serious human rights violations in Myanmar must be ensured. Today, we have heard reports from the Deputy High Commissioner as well as from the Special Rapporteur on the gravity of the situation. To prevent an escalation of the human rights situation, we believe that the continued monitoring of the situation is necessary to shed light on the developments on the ground. Therefore, we are presenting a resolution that requests follow-up reporting to the Special Rapporteur and the High Commissioner for Human Rights. The resolution offers a balanced text that has been negotiated with delegations from all regions. It is in its work towards reaching a resolution agreeable to all. The EU and the United Kingdom have held one informal and conduced bilateral consultations. We warmly thank all delegations for their cooperation and constructive comments provided throughout the negotiation process. We hope that all delegations can support the consensual adoption of this resolution. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. And I have been informed by the Secretariat that there are 10 additional co-sponsors to the draft resolution. We shall now hear general comments on the draft resolution as orally revised. I now give the floor to members of the Council who wish to make general comments on draft resolution as orally revised. Please raise your hand on Zoom if you wish to take the floor. I understand there are no requests to take the floor. We will now hear from the concerned country, and I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Myanmar. Excellency, you have the floor.
Madam President, I thank you for giving me the floor before consideration and action on the draft resolution A/HRC/S29/L1. Madam President, we need understanding and cooperation in time of transition in the country. We wish to request your kind indulgence, better understanding on the prevailing situation in the country, and your continued support to peace and stability, prevalence of law and order, and well-being of the people, which are prerequisites of the democratic transition. Madam President, however, it is imperative to preserve the dignity and the work of the Human Rights Council in accordance with the principles of universality, impartiality, objectivity, and non-selectivity, and constructive international dialogue and cooperation. Country-specific resolutions like this are not acceptable. We therefore dissociate with this resolution before us. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank you for your statement. I have been informed by the Secretariat that there are PBIs for this draft resolution as orally revised. And I will now give the floor to Mr. Eldon Pierce from the Programme Support and Management Services of the OHCHR for a statement. You have the floor.
Request the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights and the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Myanmar to assess the current human rights situation in Myanmar and to provide updates in their reports to the Human Rights Council, and calls upon Myanmar authorities to engage and cooperate with UN human rights mechanisms, and further requests the Secretary General to provide increased assistance and the resources and expertise necessary to enable them to discharge the mandate fully. Owing to the brief duration of this session and the recent presentation of the draft resolution and these oral revisions, The Secretariat has not benefited from the requisite period in which to prepare and present a formal statement of financial implications to advise the Council. The Secretariat is currently finalising its analysis of the digital requirements and the related costs. This statement is presented to inform the Council that no provision has been included within the approved programme budget for the year 2021 to accommodate any new activities. The additional requirements for the implementation of this draft resolution, if adopted, will be accordingly presented to the General Assembly in the context of the next annual report of the Secretary-General on the revised estimates resulting from resolutions and decisions adopted by the Human Rights Council. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. We will now take action on the draft resolution A/HRC/S29/L1, entitled Human Rights Implications of the Crisis in Myanmar, as orally revised. I will give the floor to the members of the Council who wish to make explanations of vote before the vote on the draft resolution as orally revised. Please raise your hand on Zoom if you wish to take the floor. No? Is there any representative who wishes to take the floor? I see no requests for the floor. Is there a request for a vote? I see none. May I take it that the draft resolution A/HRC/S29/L1, entitled Human Rights Implications of the Crisis in Myanmar, as orally revised, may be adopted without a vote? It is so decided. We will now move to explanations of vote and general comments after the vote on the text just adopted. Are there any delegations wishing to take the floor? Please raise your hand on Zoom if you do. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of China. You have the floor.
Yeah. 可以了吗？谢谢主席女士。中国在国别人权问题上的立场是一贯的。作为友好邻。
Thank you. Our position on the human rights situation in certain countries is well known as a friendly neighbour of Myanmar. We hope that the interests of the country may be respected through dialogue and through application of the law in order to address the issue and favour social stability in the country. The Myanmar issue is an internal one. The international community must urgently respect the sovereignty, political independence and territorial integrity and unity of the country in order to help the parties to achieve reconciliation in the fundamental interest of the country and its people. The action adopted by the Council must respect the interests of social stability in the country instead of aggravating conflicts. We participated in the consultations on the draft resolution and would like to thank the sponsors for adopting our recommendations. We also have reservations and concerns regarding some of the content of the resolution and do not agree with holding a special session, nor with the objective of the draft resolution. We believe that it will impose adverse impacts and does not favor a resolution of the Myanmar issue. We disassociate ourselves from the consensus on the draft resolution. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation. You have the floor.
Спасибо, госпожа председатель.
Thank you, Madam President. We have to note that consideration of Myanmar by the Human Rights Council is taking part in a politicized atmosphere and can hardly help an improvement in the human rights situation in that country. We take the view that another transfer of responsibility, the responsibility of the human rights situation lies with the country itself. The international community should provide assistance in work on this. If human rights issues are taken into the international arena, they should be resolved in a constructive, non-politicized atmosphere of cooperation with the interested state and provide unconditional support. Unfortunately, in the case of Myanmar, once more, we have accusations and pressure on a sovereign state. This is not useful. The attempt to focus on the events is politicized. Thus, the Russian Federation disassociates itself from the consensus on this resolution. Thank you.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Venezuela. The floor is yours.
Gracias.
Thank you. Madam President, Venezuela made a statement in the plenary of the special session. It disassociates itself with the consensus on the adoption of the draft resolution presented and calls for this disassociation to be reflected in the report. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Bolivia. The floor is yours. Bolivia, you have the floor.
Bolivia, you can go ahead.
Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon.
See you. Please proceed.
Bolivia
considers that this is a matter of domestic affairs and that it is important to respect state sovereignty. Therefore, we disassociate ourselves from the consensus on the adopted resolution and we call for that to be noted in the record of the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. And I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Philippines. You have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam President, for giving us the floor. Considering the non-acceptance of this resolution by the country concerned, the Philippines would like to dissociate from this resolution, and we ask that this dissociation be reflected in the records of this meeting. Thank you, Madam President.
Is there any other delegation who wishes to take the floor? I see none. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to remind you that the report of the 29th special session is currently being finalized and will shortly be posted on the Council's extranet. Our Vice President and Rapporteur, Her Excellency Ms. Monique van Dalen, is entrusted with its finalization. May I take it that the draft report is adopted ad referendum? It is so decided. Delegations will have the opportunity to submit comments through the Secretariat within 2 weeks from the date of circulation of the draft report. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, This brings us to the end of this special session. I hereby declare closed the 29th special session of the Human Rights Council.